And I have to say, as far as the Ulster Unionists, and I'll come to more detail in terms of both, but I listened to Mr Kennedy. He had dispensed with his chairman of the committee hat at this stage and had very firmly placed on his head the party hat. And he got up almost with the member for East Belfast, Mrs Long, and he seemed offended at the suggestion that she might think that the attitude and position being adopted by the Ulster Unionist Party was anything other than a principled stand, a natural position for them to adopt in the interests of the whole community. Well, I think we need to say it as it is. The Ulster Unionist position is entirely synthetic. There is no degree of truth and honesty in the Ulster Unionist position. The Ulster Unionist position is absurd given the history of the Ulster Unionist Party on this matter. And it might be worthwhile that we took a bit of time to look just exactly at what the Ulster Unionist Party's position is. They have indicated that, yes, they believe in the devolution of policing and justice. I knew they did. And I knew they did because I can recall during the period of the stewardship of Mr Trimble, now Lord Trimble, and Seamus Mallon, and during the period of the stewardship of now Lord Trimble and Mr Durkin, that there were all sorts of difficulties for the executive and negotiations were held periodically. In one of those sets of negotiations, the Ulster Unionist Party reached an agreement. They at no stage ever published this agreement because they lost the election effectively that followed and therefore they weren't required to deliver on it. But it is worth knowing what the Ulster Unionist Party had signed up to. Now, Mr Speaker, this is the Ulster Unionist Party who today have been trying to say, for point-scoring purposes, that they're the party that wants to see the devolution of policing and justice, but this just isn't time. It's too soon to have it. So what was the Ulster Unionist Party's position? The document that they agreed said, and I quote from it, "We want to see the devolution of policing and justice on a basis that is robust and workable and broadly supported by the parties. In the next Assembly," and remember this is 2003, "in the next Assembly, we will seek agreement on the practicalities of such devolution, including the necessary institutional arrangements and legislation, with the objective of achieving devolution towards the midpoint of the Assembly's lifetime." Now, it also goes on to indicate their willingness to support arrangements for consultation and cooperation on policing and justice matters with the relevant authorities in Ireland, unquote. That's the document that the Ulster Unionist Party signed up to. Now, my recollection, and I'm sure those who were more intimately involved will tell me if I'm wrong, but the guts of this was agreed at a meeting in Hillsborough. A meeting where, I'm not sure quite for what reason, but the then leader of the Ulster Unionist Party took himself off a few hours early, leaving the present leader of the Ulster Unionist Party in charge. So this isn't something you can say, oh, well, that was David Trimble, that's the past. The thumbprints of the present leader are on this, and indeed many of the people who are here in the Ulster Unionist ranks today. So the Ulster Unionist Party back in 2003 believed that in 2005, which would have been the midpoint of the following Assembly, probably around October, after the summer holidays, the devolution of policing and justice should take place. Does anybody in this House remember what the conditions were like in 2003? If people will forgive me, I will remind them. There were still killings taking place which were being attributed to the Provisional IRA. Cover names like direct action against drugs and so forth were being used. Racketeering was still going on, gangsterism was still going on, criminality was still going on. Sinn Fein had given no support to the police, the courts, the rule of law. Yet the Ulster Unionist Party was content at that stage, in those circumstances, to have the powers of policing and justice devolved. Yeah, surely.
Grateful to the First Minister for giving way. What the First Minister has omitted to include in his historical detail of the events of 2003 was that the leading nationalist party at the time were the SDLP, and the Ulster Unionist, as the largest unionist party, had the responsibility of creating stability for the people of Northern Ireland, and were judging it and attempting to give leadership. Not helped at all by the antics and the attitudes of the Democratic Unionist Party. But nonetheless, an important consideration that he omitted to admit was that it was the SDLP and, I think, broadly speaking, the broader Unionist family always considered it somewhat easier, difficult though it was, to negotiate with the SDLP and perhaps to have to deal with Sinn Fein in the way that the First Minister finds himself dealing with now.
Well, here we find out why the Ulster Unionist Party got themselves into so much trouble. Negotiating for the day. Not recognising that there is a tomorrow. This negotiation was held before an election. This decision was taken before an election. An election which everybody knew what the outcome was going to be. It was abundantly clear, because of the trend that was taking place, that the SDLP was no longer going to be the largest party. And even if the Ulster Unionist Party had missed out in what everybody else knew to be the facts, then the reality is, even then, would you put into legislation an arrangement which, if the electorate had to change its mind in future years, would have allowed Sinn Fein to have that position. So it's not an issue of it was a bit easier because it was the SDLP we were talking to. You were actually negotiating with Sinn Fein on this as well. Let's be clear. This isn't something that was done, a deal, a stitch-up with the SDLP. This was an arrangement that would be set for as long as the Assembly's legislation would last. So I have to say that I find it entirely synthetic of the Ulster Unionist Party to say, well, in the present circumstances, where Sinn Fein has ensured that they have given their support to the police, the courts and the rule of law, where we have seen decommissioning taking place, and that hadn't taken place whenever the agreement was signed, where it is clear that their campaign is over if they believe the various bodies set up by the government to look both at weaponry and indeed at the role of the terrorist organisations. And therefore, if the conditions have changed since 2003, there isn't anybody out there who will say that they haven't changed for the better. And if they have changed for the better, and it was okay to do it in 2003, why is it not okay to do it here we are in 2009? Now, the reality is that the Ulster Unionists can't answer that question. Well, I would warn